Your Royal Highness Crown Prince Haakon, Minister of Research and Higher Education, Ola Borten, laureates, Professor Sheila Jasanoff and Associate Professor Elisa Uusimäki, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends of the University. On behalf of the University of Bergen, I am very grateful for this privilege to finally welcome you all to this year's Holberg Prize and Nils Klim Prize award ceremony. The Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize were established by the Norwegian Parliament in 2003 with the goal of recognizing international leading scholars in the fields of humanities, social science, law and theology. Today, we will celebrate the greatness of two scholars, Sheila Jasanoff within the studies of science and technology, and Elisa Uusimäki for her studies in theology, that is the literary and cultural history of Judaism in antiquity. These past years have been difficult and have had strong impact on us all, our society, our nation, and our universities. Many have made sacrifices. The fields that we are celebrating today are at the very core of reflecting and learning from the crisis. Questions like, what is freedom in times of crisis? How do we prioritize and practice decision-making? How do we structure our societies? How do we value work? And what about our laws? Did they protect the most vulnerable among us? And what are the political implications of the pandemic? The COVID crisis has invited us to rethinking our ethics, our technologies, society and economy for the benefit and enrichment of society. And we have a devastating war in Europe. And these same fields of study are again fundamental. What are the political and economic implications of the war, and what is the role of history in the invasion of Ukraine? How do we create belonging? What is solidarity and what is identity? We need to cultivate a social and historical consciousness. I feel certain that it is clear to everyone here that we strongly need the humanities, law, social sciences and theology to create a democratic, liberating and sustainable future. The university, and in particular a university that hosts these fields of studies, are spaces from which new futures have emerged. It is my strong belief that this is still our role. The University of Bergen is extremely proud to host the Holberg Prize. Thank you so much for your attention, and again, heartily welcome.
Your Royal Highness, Minister, Laureates, Rector, Excellencies, guests and friends from Norway and abroad. Welcome to the award ceremony for the Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize. Today, we are pleased to honor and celebrate the 2022 laureates Sheila Jasanoff and Elisa Uusimäki. and as chair of the Holberg Board, appointed by the University of Bergen, it is my great privilege to guide you through this award ceremony. We are gathered in the University Aula in Bergen, the home of the Holberg Prize, where we will celebrate these outstanding laureates who have made groundbreaking contributions to research in the academic fields covered by the Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize. Now, the Holberg Prize was established by the Norwegian Parliament in 2003, and the prize is administered by the University of Bergen on behalf of the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research. Every year, 2 prizes are awarded in the academic fields of the humanities, social sciences, law, and theology, the main Holberg Prize and the Nils Klim Prize. The prizes are awarded by the board on behalf of the University of Bergen and on the strong recommendation of academic committees, which consist of outstanding scholars in the relevant academic fields. Now, one of the main ambitions of the Holberg Prize is to inspire and engage young scholars and to promote dialogue across different generations of researchers. The Nils Klim Prize is therefore awarded annually to a young researcher under 35 years of age from or in a Nordic country. The prize is named after Ludvig Holberg's young hero in his novel Nils Klim's Underground Travels from 1741. And the value of the prize is 500,000 Norwegian kroner, or approximately 50,000 euros. On behalf of the University of Bergen and on the recommendation of the Nils Klim Committee, it is now my great pleasure to announce that the board of the Holberg Prize has decided that this year's Nils Klim Prize shall be awarded to Associate Professor Elisa Uusimäki. Elisa Uusimäki, born 1986, is Associate Professor of Hebrew Bible and Ancient Judaism at the Department of Theology, School of Culture and Society at Aarhus University in Denmark. After completing her PhD degree in theology from the University of Helsinki in 2013, she pursued postdoctoral research in Helsinki, Jerusalem, and Groningen, as well as at Yale University and New York University. In addition, she received a Doctor of Theology degree from Aarhus University in 2022. The Nils Klim Committee notes that Uusimäki is an exceptionally accomplished and productive scholar of the literary and cultural history of Judaism in antiquity. In her wide-ranging research, she moves confidently between the Dead Sea Scrolls, early Jewish writings, and Hellenistic philosophy, combining the insights emerging from these varied sources in a highly original fashion. Uusimäki has already published close to 40 peer-reviewed articles, co-edited 3 books, and written 2 monographs. One is Turning Proverbs Towards Torah, an analysis of 4Q525 from 2016, and Lived Wisdom in Jewish Antiquity, Studies in Exercise and Exemplarity from 2021. She has received several awards and grants, including a recent European Research Council's starting grant for the project An Intersectional Analysis of Ancient Jewish Travel Narratives. Elisa Uusimäki is eminently accomplished in her academic area, relying on linguistic skills in several languages and philological as well as hermeneutic expertise as she delves into texts and matters that are highly relevant to our historical understanding of the ancient world. Her research topics and her ways of combining to grips with them also relate in significant ways to contemporary global concerns. She has worked in the areas of wisdom studies, descriptive ethics, and cultural interaction, addressing issues such as lived ancient religion, gender, intersectionality, social hierarchy, enslavement, and several aspects of mobility. And recently, she has also turned her attention to women's journeys, the impact of plagues, and travel-related anxieties. Elisa Uusimäki's research span is remarkable, and her combination of classical and contemporary approaches, as well as her numerous original contributions to scholarship, are impressive and exemplary. She is a most worthy recipient of the 2022 Nils Klim Prize. And I would now like to ask Minister of Higher Education and Research, Ola Borten Moe, and Elisa Uusimäki to join me on the stage, where the Minister will confer this year's Nils Klim Prize on Associate Professor Elisa Uusimäki.
Your Royal Highness Crown Prince Haakon, Minister Ola Borten Moe, Rector Margaret Hagen, the Nils Klim Committee, the Holberg Board, the Holberg Prize recipient Sheila Jasanoff, dear friends and colleagues. It is an unimaginable honor and a source of joy to join the ranks of Nils Klim laureates today. I express my sincere gratitude to all who nominated, recommended, and awarded me. I also thank those who established the Nils Klim Prize in the first place. I interpret its very existence as a powerful recognition to all of us investigating the diversity and richness of human culture, whether in the past or in the present. It is an exceptional acknowledgement of the significance and validity of our research areas. The Nils Klim Prize signals that they carry value in our societies and belong to the heart of the academic enterprise, as they have done ever since the medieval beginning of the university institution, when theology, philosophy, and law played a decisive role in the curriculum. It was not easy for me to choose what to study, as I felt that all lines of inquiry would open up new vistas to be explored. Yet I decided to begin with the study of religion and theology to figure out some aspects of what it is to be human, just as Ludwig Holberg had done some 300 years earlier. Along with this choice, I ended up reading ancient texts requiring me to learn one language after another. Aside from languages, I learned about words that are both lost to us and still vital in that cultures and traditions building on them continue to be generative around the globe. My choice was rather intuitive, but one that I do not regret. I agree with Henry Thoreau, who writes in his Walden from 1854 that, quote, "It is worth the expense of youthful days and costly hours if you learn only some words of an ancient language. The adventurous student will always study classics in whatever language they may be written and however ancient they may be," end quote. I have gained much from the exercise of deliberate reading, even if the customs of the day do not always see its value, and, quote, "men sometimes speak as if the study of the classics would at length make way for more modern and practical studies," end quote, as Thoreau observed. While the study of ancient texts is laborious, it is also a delightful task, inviting us to reconstruct past literary cultures and social realities. Yet ancient texts are more than mere relics. They can serve as conversation partners as we navigate our lives as individuals and communities in the 21st century. Thus, I was glad to read that the Nils Klim Committee appreciates the ways in which my studies of antiquity relate to contemporary concerns. Recently, I have begun to investigate experiences of both forced and voluntary relocations in antiquity. The authors speak of gaining knowledge through travel, depict fears and anxieties arising from movement, warn against travel as a cue for discontent, and draw attention to its socio-economic aspects. They show how travel both facilitates and destroys things, for instance, by enabling access to new immaterial and material resources, and by disrupting social ties or patterns of everyday life. These issues also color Holberg's narrative about Nils Klim, who explores the depths of the earth, discovering ways of living that fill the itinerant wanderer with both awe and otherness. I am glad that we could travel here today, though I do not take it for granted after the pandemic experience. Yet our moves do not depend only on open borders or valid certificates. As for my journey to Bergen, I am indebted to webs of interdependence and interaction that have enabled it. The list begins with my parents, who endorsed my curiosity as a child, and continues with my teachers, advisors, colleagues, and co-authors who have stimulated my thinking and thought with me. In my mind are especially those in Helsinki who helped me grow into a scholar, and my colleagues in Aarhus who believed in me and gave me a tenured job after years of uncertainty. Special thanks are due to my students who teach me every day with their questions. Finally, I am grateful to Stephen, who has been willing to relocate because of my precarious academic aspirations, always approaching new countries, cultures, and languages with the curiosity of a true explorer such as Nils Klim. I thank you all.
The Holberg Prize is awarded annually to scholars who have made outstanding contributions to research in the humanities, social sciences, law, or theology, either in one discipline or through interdisciplinary work. The laureate must have had a decisive influence on international research. The value of the prize is 6 million Norwegian kroner, equivalent to approximately $620,000 or 600,000 euros. On behalf of the University of Bergen and on the recommendations of the Holberg Committee, the board of the Holberg Prize has decided that this year's Holberg Prize goes to Professor Sheila Jasanoff. Sheila Jasanoff, born 1944, is Pforzheimer Professor of Science and Technology Studies at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. As one of the world's most influential scholars in developing the field of Science and Technology Studies, STS, Jasanoff has forged a unique interdisciplinary body of research at the intersection of the social sciences, humanities, arts for people and economy, SHAPE in short, and STEM disciplines, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The Holberg Committee points out that Jasanoff has developed much of the conceptual repertoire for theorizing the political and policy relations of science and technology in contemporary societies. Her theoretical contributions to the political sociology of scientific governance are transformational, recognizing that scientific practices and knowledges, along with the policy and legal frameworks governing them, must be understood as culturally situated and socially constructed. This argument is captured in her collected essays, Science and Public Reason, from 2012. A central insight in Jasanoff's work is that science, technology, and modern society are co-produced. Her work is distinctive in analyzing how practices of expert knowledge, production, and background beliefs about science impact on the modes of argument and persuasion that count as good justification, not only for public policies and legal decisions, but also within scientific practice itself. Furthermore, her work on co-production, socio-technical imaginaries, and civic epistemologies has wide implications for theory and practice of democracy in the 21st century. Among her most influential books have been Science at the Bar, Law, Science and Technology in America from 1995, and Designs on Nature, Science and Democracy in Europe and the United States from 2005. Her most recent work include The Ethics of Invention from 2016, Dream Escapes of Modernity, Socio-Technical Imaginaries and the Fabrication of Power with Sang-Hyun Kim from 2016, and Can Science Make Sense of Life? The specific issues her work has addressed include genetic engineering, stem cell treatments, reproductive technologies, climate change, and chemical production. Now, Sheila Jasanoff, she spent her childhood in India. She has taught at institutions around the world and has been outstandingly influential in both capacity building and nurturing new generations of scholars, including founding and directing the Kennedy School's program on STS at Harvard University. She also founded in 2002 and still chairs the Science and Democracy Network, a global community of STS scholars dedicated to improving scholarly understanding of the relationships between science, technology, law, and political power. Through sharing her work in both academic and popular forums, Jasanoff is a significant public intellectual offering timely comments on topics of public concern, such as fake news and climate change. Crucially, Jasanoff combines a high level of conceptual creativity with empirical rigor and accessible writing. Indeed, Jasanoff is read not only by humanities and social science scholars, but also by natural and medical scientists and policymakers, her work being truly wide-ranging and cross-disciplinary. The Holberg Committee concludes that Sheila Jasanoff is undoubtedly a highly worthy recipient of the 2022 Holberg Prize. And I would now like to ask Crown Prince Haakon and Professor Sheila Jasanoff to join me on the stage, where the Crown Prince will confer this year's Holberg Prize on Professor Sheila Jasanoff.
Your Royal Highness, Minister, Madam Rector, Chair of the Holberg Board, honored members of the Holberg Committee, eminent colleagues, and cherished family and friends. It is a humbling experience to stand here today as the 2022 Holberg Prize laureate, not only because I follow in the footsteps of so many distinguished predecessors, but because I'm called upon to represent a set of concerns and a field of study of such immediacy and salience that no one person could possibly be up to the task of expressing what this award means for us at this time in our collective history. On March 14th, Rector and Professor Margaret Hagen announced this year's Holberg and Nils Klim Awards against the backdrop of the then 3-week-old Russian invasion of Ukraine. She described it as, and I quote, the largest military attack in Europe since the Second World War. Events such as this remind us, she said, of our academic duty to promote critical thinking, independent research, and understanding in line with the ideas of the Holberg Prize. Importantly for me, as for my honored predecessors, this is a research prize bestowed in recognition of work in the social sciences, humanities, law, and theology. In short, all the branches of scholarship that strive to understand not only how the world works, a task that we have chiefly delegated to the natural sciences, medicine, and engineering, but why we should care to understand and what we should do with the fruits of our hard-won knowledge. In a time of war, our work asks not what makes the engines of destruction work, but why we turn our knowledge and know-how to making swords and spears when just as easily we could be making pruning hooks or plowshares. Fulfilling our role as critical thinkers and as purposive moral agents has never seemed more urgent or challenging than now, as we confront the layered catastrophes of a receding pandemic, climate change, resource depletion, economic inequality, political polarization, and the rise of extremism and violence. Yet, confront them we must, and as problems of our own making, all of them have special resonance for STS. In my brief remarks here, I want to speak about how these challenges have affected some of the work that my colleagues and I are doing in keeping with the 4 lines of ethically engaged scholarship that I believe the Holberg Prize seeks to recognize and reward. To look usefully forward, it often makes sense to first look back. How is it that our little field of science and technology studies, or STS, became so central to critical thinking in this century that I am, by one count, the 3rd STS laureate, together with Bruno Latour and Ian Hacking, to have been honored with this prize? I think it is because the problems of our time require us to revisit the fundamental questions of what we know and how we know it, every bit as earnestly as during the great periods of religious reform in the past, only this time from a free-thinking, secular perspective. We are, after all, questioning the foundations of collective knowledge. Not only how do I know, but how do we, as social formations, know, from family to ethnic group to nation-states and the entire globe? How, across the world's dizzying sociocultural divides, can we know the same facts well enough to act in concert upon them? These questions, I believe, would have been congenial to an Enlightenment mind like Holberg's. The shorthand that many accept is that we know things because science tells us. Science is simply our shared knowledge of the world as it is. The more my field has looked into the matter, however, the less it seems that this answer is adequate. We must press deeper, and when we do, we discover that it was our insistence on the specialness of science that led us astray. Enlightenment now tells us that science does not stand apart from society, but grows out of it. Making scientific knowledge is a collective enterprise that draws on politics and culture. At the same time, what we know and how we use our knowledge influence how culture and politics reimagine themselves. I call this duality co-production, as you've already heard. The simplest definition from my 2004 edited volume, States of Knowledge, is this: the ways in which we know and represent the world, both nature and society, are inseparable from the ways in which we choose to live in it. For me, the relations between what we know and how we choose to live became evident from my very first research project. The focus was mundane, the regulation of cancer-causing chemicals. Our team's findings, however, were anything but. We discovered that 4 countries, very similar in terms of wealth, scientific knowledge, and political preference, they were the US, Germany, Britain, and France, did not regulate the same chemicals in the same ways. One example was asbestos. In philosophical terms, it was an invariant substance, a natural kind. But in the dynamics of disparate political systems, asbestos split into a multiplicity of kinds that called forth different technical and policy solutions. In America, we did our best to remove asbestos from all the built environments in which we found it, whereas British authorities concluded, by and large, that asbestos should remain undisturbed where it was already fixed in place. The result? More cost and upheaval for property owners in the US, but also more technological innovation of diagnostic and protective equipment, and more differentiation of asbestos fiber types, and greater attention to cancer epidemiology in Britain. Attributing agency to asbestos could not explain these subtleties. At stake, it seemed, was not what we know in common, nor what objects we bring into the world, but what forms of life, with their costs and benefits, we think are worth living in the first place, and how those commitments play out in the trajectories of invention and discovery that our societies, in all their rich diversity, embrace. I turned to interpretive social theory as my intellectual habitat of choice, because that was where I could pursue these sorts of questions. Unexpectedly, but to my delight, I found fellow travelers and eager students to teach in the process. Fast forward then to the 2020s. For me, the social science pillar of the Holberg Quartet of Ideas has been about trying to understand systems of collective meaning-making that help make sense of science and technology. I'm not primarily interested in turning society itself into an object of cold scientific scrutiny, as if it is an object driven by natural law. Rather, what interests me and my close colleagues in STS is how actors in the world perceive, rationalize, and act upon their understandings of what affects or afflicts them. How, in short, do we, as social groups, find our way in worlds of new or changing knowledge? From this intellectual standpoint, the COVID-19 pandemic provided an immediate and urgent site for asking STS questions. Early in the outbreak, we were fortunate enough to receive funding from the US National Science Foundation and a private source, Schmidt Futures, to launch a comparative study of national responses to COVID-19. With my colleagues Stephen Hilgardner and Ben Hurlbut, both of whom are happily in the audience today, we launched a study that expanded to include 16 countries and 60 researchers, almost all of whom found their own resources to join our study. It was an exhilarating experience to see how quickly and enthusiastically our STS community mobilized to ask fundamental questions about knowledge and social action. How did our respective societies frame the pandemic? Where did they turn for evidence? How and how well did they resolve disputes? And how did they take care of their members when so many of the supports of our lives, from schools and hospitals to offices and social spaces, were suddenly rendered off limits? This still ongoing study has propelled our research toward a second pillar of the Holberg Quartet, the law. In my own work, I have been for some time rethinking the idea of constitutionalism to take account of a tacit constitution that supports and enables political life in the 21st century. This is the constitutional agreement our societies have forged with the institutions of science and technology. I call these accommodations constitutional because in many ways we have allowed science and technology to govern our lives. These arrangements remain tacit because we have never fully interrogated the principled basis for delegating authority to the expert few to rule for the many who do not know as much. Our research on the pandemic made visible aspects of modernity's constitutional compact that had not been so plain before. Soon after the virus struck, I found myself writing about public health sovereignty to capture the principles by which we have ceded power to health authorities to restrict our freedom in states of emergency. What is the nature of this sovereignty? The fascinating thing from an interpretive standpoint was to unpack how differently the delegations have played out from country to country. Striking differences appeared not only in the degree of conflict or consensus around public health regulations, but also on the discourses of contestation, the knowledge claims advanced to resolve them, and the details of policy responses. One tiny example from Norway and the US is illustrative. In our preparatory discussions for Holberg Week, I mentioned to my colleague and friend Roger Strand that my husband and I had succumbed to COVID in mid-March. Roger replied, "Well, now you don't have to worry about your COVID status for 6 months." That surprised me because in the US, we're exempt from testing requirements for only 90 days. How can we make sense of such a discrepancy? Here, again, is the same kind of difference that I observed between asbestos policies in Britain and the US so many years ago. It seems that in Norway, the body speaks through clinical knowledge and medical understanding. If you have had COVID, you are not infected for 6 months. In the US, we would sooner trust the test, a technological device, to tell the truth about our bodies. 90 days is the period our authorities picked, because that is the range within which tests are likely to produce false positives. As in the case of asbestos, we Americans would sooner outsource our safety to supposedly objective technological devices than to the clinician's subjective human judgment. That brings me to the humanities, the third and for me most important pillar of the Holberg Quartet. I have already suggested that the kind of social science that is most revealing to our school of STS is also the most human-centric. It is the form of self-knowledge that Max Weber referred to as Verstehen, or understanding. As an interpretive social science, STS is not content to treat people as if they were just so many beans to be counted and sorted by the empirical methods of the natural sciences. STS asks how we and our institutions make sense of things, not simply how we behave. The pandemic, with its array of new ways to monitor and discipline populations, opened up a sea of questions for STS, but the need for humanistic analysis reaches further and wider than the pandemic and its immediate aftermath. We are living in an era of convergent technologies whose combined effect is to increase our powers of centralized control at the expense of faculties that our ancestors considered essential for preserving human integrity, dignity, and personal autonomy. In the past half-century, we have gained unimaginable information processing speed and efficiency, along with a deep knowledge of the molecular makeup of life and how to manipulate it. We now have tools to monitor every aspect of a person's day-to-day activities. No one is free from the all-seeing eyes of our digital environment. There are no crevices to hide in, much as we might tinker with the privacy settings each time we visit a new site on the internet. And by combining biological data from the human genome with the power of the information sciences and technologies, we have gained the potential many biologists claim to correct any perceived genetic defect and even to steer the course of evolution itself. But what does it mean to fulfill one's potential as a human being if everything about us is knowable, if we no longer retain control over how much is revealed of our preferences or how long those traces can be retained? And what does human autonomy mean if the physical matter of our genes can be manipulated in the light of such knowledge? To address these questions, my colleagues and I launched a wide-ranging program that we call the Global Observatory for Genome Editing. Our aim is to use STS insights to reflect more deeply on the ethical implications of these new technological powers. We hope to develop what we call a cosmopolitan bioethics that is open to diverse ideas of what it means to be human and how to protect the essence of humanness against the assaults of a newly overwhelming machine age. Ethics, finally, can be seen as a bridge to theology, the last of the Holberg Prize's 4 intellectual pillars. Theology does not feature formally in the canon of STS or of my own current frontiers of research and teaching, not if it is understood as a study of canonical texts on the nature of God or religious belief. Indeed, I myself was brought up by progressive parents in an unobservant secular household in Calcutta. The sacred, however, always had its place in our lives, from my grandmother's personal shrine that she prayed at during the months she spent in our home — it was shrouded the rest of the time — to the exposure to Christianity engendered by our education in English-speaking schools, to the songs of the famed Bengali poet and Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore that remain a spiritual refuge for me in times of loss or sorrow. Maybe that early ecumenical upbringing also colors my interest in the limits of the scientific and technological imagination, a recurrent concern in my work on sociotechnical imaginaries over the past decade. By dominating so much of what humans imagine and desire about their futures, science and technology have taken over territory that traditionally belonged to theology. It is not a death of God that we are witnessing in our contemporary era, but rather an appropriation of the realms of the sacral by the material means that science has placed within our grasp. In biology, in the earth sciences, and at the frontiers of information and communication technologies, we see a displacement of the sense of divinely ordained futures by a powerful urge to shape and design our futures as we see fit for ourselves. Whether these ambitions are the logical outgrowth of the Enlightenment's drive to know, or frightening acts of hubris based on overestimation of our knowledge and capability, our community's research on imaginaries has a critical role to play. We can trace the origins of diverse imaginations of the good, point out important erasures and exclusions, shed light on alternatives, and open up discussions on aspects of the human condition that the seemingly inevitable advances of science and technology have left out of their ken. STS offers in these respects a kind of necessary companion to classical theology. With its gaze fixed firmly on the secular, our field helps delineate how our societies can still preserve spaces for a sacral inner world in domains where what is possible is not necessarily taken as what is inevitable. I hope I have said enough to indicate why the award of the Holberg Prize carries such deep significance for my personal work and for the work of my entire field. It gives me the courage to keep moving forward into new territories with questions that have not been sanctioned by the traditional disciplines and yet are grounded in the realities of human experience, the insecurities of changing knowledge, and the material difficulties of living on a planet of unequal and dwindling resources. I accept this award on behalf of a generation of inquirers who will dare to step outside of the strictures of the old disciplines and ask what truly matters and how we can try harder as individuals and collectives to bend our scientific and technological ingenuity toward the greater good. In thanking you once again for this extraordinary honor, which it is my great privilege to accept, I would like to close with an invocation from a song of Rabindranath Tagore that is also a prayer for peace. Composed in 1927 and translated by Tagore himself from the Bengali original, I feel it has special resonance for this time and for my field. Thou giver of immortal gifts, give us the power of renunciation and claim from us our pride. In the splendor of a new sunrise of wisdom, let the blind gain their sight, and let life come to the souls that are dead. O serene, O free, in thine immeasurable mercy and goodness, wipe away all dark stains from the heart of this earth. And now, if you will indulge me for a moment, I would like to say that last line in the language that it was written in, which has not often been heard in this beautiful space. It is Shanta he, Mukta he Ananta Punno, Korunaghana Dharanitalo, Karo Kalankashuna. Thank you.